All right, welcome back everybody to the Jiu-Jitsu Mindset. My name is Pete Deely, and I'm here with my professor, Professor Lucas Rubbo. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Dean. Welcome back, everyone. Always a pleasure to be here with you guys. Last week, I couldn't make it. On the last episode, I was in Las Vegas competing at the Node Worlds. So it was always a
Excellent.
good experience. Unfortunately, I have some crazy stories to talk about that match, but that's go for another day.
Okay, we will. Yeah, we want to hear about that, but there's a backlog of submission coffee. We got more submission coffee than usual.
There we
And
go.
do you know why there, Professor? Because I didn't take enough submission. I was competing that weekend too, and I lost. And I can only attribute it to a lack of my submission coffee intake. So,
I'm really sipping mine here. That's my second mug of the day, and that's just starting, man. That's
uh,
all you need.
all right. Well, my friends have reminded me what a poor promoter of our coffee that I am because I never tell people where to get it. So you go to submissioncoffee.com, and we would love to send you a bag. Our good fortune, Professor Lucas, it continues this week. We have gotten a chance to talk to lots and lots of amazing people, and the divine has smiled again on us. And we have Professor Malachy Friedman with us, who we've already kind of talked a little bit before starting. I'm pretty confident we're going to have another amazing conversation. So, Professor Malachy, thank you very much for making time for us. We're so glad you're
Thank
here.
you. Welcome.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome.
So, Professor Malachi, there's so many different things that we want to ask you and talk about, and we promise to just keep you to an hour. Um, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience with jiu-jitsu as a teacher, because I'm
Yeah.
unsure that the day you first stepped on a jiu-jitsu mat that you might have conceived a future where you'd be teaching people and given your presence online, you've actually been
Yeah.
teaching millions and millions of people. So maybe you could
Yeah, I've been
talk
lucky.
about, yeah, right. I mean, well, you're a rare combination, I think, of like somebody who has a very strong presence that is conveyed in the
Mhm.
way that you're captured through video with, expert instruction, and that doesn't exist in the same person very often. But still, I'm sure along the way there must have been some either set of catalysts or reasons that you decided that that was what you wanted to spend
Yeah.
some time on?
So I got started about 18 or 19. I went to my friend was a blue belt and we would wrestle in the front yard after drinking. And then
That's a
he would
great
always like
conversation.
submit, yeah, he would always submit me guillotines, like just different stuff. And I was like, I wanted to learn it so bad. I was like, I want to know why I was being beaten so badly that we like would wrestle upstairs, like with like bloody knees on carpet. And then I decided, like, I did not want to put a gi on. Like this was like 2001, and I think this is about the time that like I don't know if you know any rap stuff, but Jay Z or Nas made fun of Jay Z for being in like a Tai Chi class. And I was like, "Oh, man, I can't wear, like, a karate outfit." I mean, karate had been made fun of so bad, you know what I mean? You had, like, Martin Lawrence with you playing the karate guy, and I was like, "I can't put a gi on, it's so silly," you know? And I got so I went towards MMA, no gi stuff. Like, I was 100% dialed in on that. I ended up going to training at a lot of different places. I was training out in Oregon with the former world champion Evan Tanner. I went to Vegas, moved to Vegas for a little bit. I moved to Philadelphia, and then I ended up my last move before my final move to Charleston, South Carolina was American Top Team in Florida, where I met my coach, Master Laborio. Um,
The
and
legend of jiu-jitsu
yeah,
for those that never heard,
he's
but he's one of the toughest guys from Carson Gracie. And the legend says that Carson was training him to beat Rickson Gracie. That was like
yeah,
how good he was.
that was the idea. I think that was there was that he was their champion. Yeah, that he was going to be the guy to beat Hickson. And so I was, of course, I was doing MMA at the time, and I kind of knew where my brain was for a long time, just because when I first started fighting and doing jujitsu and doing stuff like that, there was no real instructionals or anything like that. Like I had the Theory and Concepts by Hoyler and Hinzo. And then I had there's like maybe one or two other books that were out with jujitsu stuff in it. And there was a site, like the internet just started getting popular. And so there was a site called subfighter.com, and you could have like instructionals. So they were good and bad. Remember watching MMA, watching fights and watching like Shogun fight and like seeing how he was passing guard, like he was like he was stepping around the legs and sliding through like baseball sliding through to half the side control. And I would write all this stuff down. Like I was just like be watching fights of like Nick Diaz and versus Diego Sanchez, just writing stuff down. Because I didn't have in Oregon, we had some good training, but we didn't really have like a class where it was like, okay, this is the move today. It was more like, we're gonna fight. We're gonna spar, and then if something comes up that we can help you with, we'll help you with it. And so instead of just being learning jiu-jitsu the way that normal people learn it, I didn't get to learn it that way. And it made me a little bit unorthodox. And I was, training and when I went to Florida, I could beat some really good guys, like some very, very talented fighters that as long as they played the scramble game, I guess I was almost like an insult, like, maybe this guy has been in ADCC, right? And I start looking for guillotine chokes and like diving on things fast. Then they start to pick up the pace and I can survive in that pace, right? Because I'm so used to scrambling and looking for things. And then I would always have a guy that would beat me like by inches. So like you can't talk about the guys that you do well against, but you can talk about the guys you do terribly against, right? So there's a guy named Marcus Aurelio. He fought Takanori Gomi, submitted him when Takanori Gomi was like the top of the top in pride. He wouldn't submit me. He would just pass my guard really slowly, and then I would put him back into the guard, and he would pass my guard. Then one round would end, and I'd be okay. That was not great. That's okay. Like you didn't submit me, you didn't do it. Then the next time he's passing the guard, he's going to mount, having to like get him off the mount. And I'm like, fuck, like he's like beating me by the smallest inches of like, so he slowed the game down so much that I couldn't react. I couldn't scramble to save myself. I could only get put in a worse situation. Maybe I could scramble back to a closed guard or something. But that I didn't understand what was different. And then I hurt my neck, right? So I ended up injuring my neck and getting a neck surgery, thinking I was going to come back to MMA. Had another neck surgery that didn't work. It just didn't work. It just wasn't my body anymore. So I was going to go home, and Laborio told me, no, you're going to be a great teacher. Put the gi on, put the gi on so you can get your black belt and stuff. And I was like, okay. And
How long you took that? Sorry to interrupt you, Professor Malachy, but for your for this conversation to happen, and the body said, okay, put the gi on. And how long it was since you started to this point?
So 8 years of training before I put the gi on.
Wow.
I maybe put the gi on once or twice. So I was at Almeida's school for a little bit, Ricardo Almeida's school.
Okay, cool.
And he was like, okay, because I just wanted to train. I didn't care about what it was. Like, I didn't care that if there was no MMA practice, there was no gi class. It was just a gi class. I was like, okay, let me do that. So I put a gi on maybe 3 or 4 times in when I was in New Jersey, but I never really put a gi on and like came part of my, and I'll tell you this is a big thing. I think a lot of instructors should know about this. And I let my students get away with this all the time, is not tying their belt properly, right? Is not having their gi disheveled, or sometimes they come to me with their gis around their neck. I think one of the biggest things that you can understand is that these people don't know how to tie their belt, right? They're number one, they're putting on a karate kimono. This is what kept me away from jiu-jitsu. I think like gi jiu-jitsu for a long time is I don't know how to tie the belt. I don't know how to wear the outfit. And when I did get on the mats, I got harassed by the black belts for not having it on right, or for not tying my belt up. and I don't know how to do these things. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'm not the quickest person to learn how to tie a belt, and I memorize it as soon as you show me the first time. I don't, like, so like I'm trying to put a knot on it or whatever. That's why in my academy, I let people come up. They come in, they'll have their gi untied, maybe they'll have their gi open, and I understand that they're in the white belt line. So we have different lines. They're in the white belt line. If they're in the blue belt line, get your shit together. If you're in the white belt line, I understand you don't have any of your shit together. You're barely making it. You're coming to class and you're trying to survive. So I think that's a big thing that coaches should know is that, like, hey, stop being so traditional, like aggressive about the gi and where the gi should be and where the red stripe should be or the black pad should be. These guys are barely like, the gi doesn't fit them because they don't know a gi. They bought a gi off, they bought some Sanibel off online, right? They don't know how to tie their belt. They have zero idea of whether they're supposed to bow, whether they're supposed to call you. You got to give these guys so much room to be
Yes.
who they are.
No idea what to expect, right? So
Right.
you can create expectations if they don't know what those are, right?
Right. And so I always like people kind of get away with it. And guess what? There's not one person that's been with me for 3 months that doesn't tie their belt right, that doesn't have their gi on correctly. It just takes time. They got, it just takes time for everybody to get their shit together and feel comfortable and remember what they're doing, remember the sequences. So yeah, a big reason why I didn't put the gi on was because I didn't know how to tie my belt.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I mean, because when we talk to people who are listening to us that are interested in trying jujitsu, we encourage them, to come in. And one of the things that we suggest prior to picking a gym is to sit down, and just watch how the school is run, and to see that what the ethic of the teachers, or the professors are. And one of the things that I love about Professor Lucas is that what you're talking about exists in our particular school, and we think that there are many places that are attentive to the students. And if a place is harassing white belts for not having mastery of anything, I mean, that's just not a place. That's not good business. The school is not going to do very well from that way, and it's not good instruction. So everybody loses in that environment. The person leaves, the school loses out on that business, and the sport doesn't grow. So it sounds to me like as you had your own discomfort, as you moved towards being a teacher, took that with you so that you understood,
Right.
hey, people come in the door. This can be a very intimidating situation, especially in classes, right? You have this amplitude between it's day one and it's year 10. And there, jujitsu for me, the experience, and I'm a beginner, is a very slow incremental process. So that person in year one versus even 3 or 5, I mean, those are very different creatures.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the way I look at it is that if I had discomfort,
right,
right? If I had discomfort putting on, and even I had discomfort when I was putting on a gi and I had 8 years, like all
right,
of a sudden, like, so a lot of the black belts that were there, like not all of them, but there was 2 or 3 black belts that were there that that were MMA fighters, right?
right.
That I had sparred with, that I have done jujitsu with, that I've done very well with, right? Like it's back and forth on certain things. When I came on the mats, man, it was like, they had this super traditional background and they were such an asshole to me. I was like,
Oh
what
my
the,
gosh.
I'm like, bro, like we, like we've been with each other. We've sparred each other a million times. Why are you
Right,
being a jerk to me right now?
right.
And it's because that's their playground, and that's how they want to be perceived as some kind of, like, I don't know, king godlike figure. And I hated it. I
Yeah,
hated the whole concept of like having your nose up in the air or being like or being a black belt out to dinner. You know what I mean? Like I see that a lot, is that like they they go out with one of their students or something like that and they don't pay any money. They don't pay, like, a student professor doesn't pay, like,
yeah.
like the bill just gets slid to somebody
I
else.
love that. I gotta use that.
Yeah, Professor Lucas may be reviving some of those traditions.
Yeah,
When
forgot about it.
when you so Professor Malachi, in terms of like those guys being, bad partners to you, I'm presuming that what you mean by that is like both in attitude and then an unwillingness to kind of move you through whatever instruction you might have, whatever delta there might have been between what you knew and what they knew.
Yeah.
Is that part of it, or
Yeah, maybe
describe
they
what that
wanted to
means?
break me down. Maybe
Okay.
they wanted to break me down a bit. Maybe they wanted me to realize that this wasn't MMA, that this wasn't
Mm.
like we weren't peers any longer, that they were the instructors. And I can understand that to a degree. I just I just don't understand for a lot of jiu-jitsu guys, uh, when we all had a beginning and we all had something,
Right,
it's
right,
like a little bit more compassion towards people is and to make them feel comfortable, to make them like get on the mat, like understanding like you don't have to roll your first time, you don't have to do this,
right,
like
right.
okay, you can watch. And then like I do like some like really like basic stuff sometimes. A lot of times we'll have like so I believe that if you get most like this is especially for women, past the age of 8, they start
Mhm.
to feel awkward about making contact with people,
Sure.
right? And then you get like maybe a 23 to 33-year-old woman, right?
Right.
He doesn't know how hard to hold somebody, how
Sure.
to cross that barrier of like really trying to control and do something to somebody and and having and themselves being okay with it emotionally or mentally or whatever they're doing. So a lot of times when I have like, and I'll do this with guys too. It doesn't. It's just more women
Sure.
than men. And so I'll say like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. I show them how to hold side control and how to escape side control.
Right.
And I said, okay, like so you're gonna hold your friend, you're gonna hold them in side control, they're gonna try to get out. And so they have the feeling of jujitsu, which is like control and like that strong aggression and trying to like hold somebody down and not let them leave the position.
Right.
And it ends really very quickly,
Yes.
if the other person gets escapes, and then they switch, so they get the idea of what jujitsu is without knowing any jujitsu moves, really, just the concepts of control,
Mm.
and that generally takes them to the next level where they feel a little bit more comfortable in grabbing or holding somebody down. So it's like you got to be careful of how you institute what we do naturally
Yep.
for us to other people.
Mhm.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it seems as though your sensitivity to your own experience informed how you began to teach. And that, as you look at, well, what was it like for you? And you had natural talents, you had trained talents too in one area, MMA. And then as you made the transition, it sounds like you had things that you had to learn or relearn, whatever, however you might describe it. And as a beginner and an older beginner, I started jujitsu at 50, and so I come into an environment where these types of movements and this brand of athleticism were brand new to me, and I'm a slow learner. So having a Professor Lucas and my teammates really go easy with me. If I'd walked into that environment that you walked into, Professor
Right.
Malachi, there'd be no way because I just don't have the time to go spend 90 minutes and then feel bad about those 90 minutes. It has to be a positive experience. As you had those negative aspects of your experience with jujitsu in the beginning, was there a model of teaching that you saw that you're like, "Oh, here's somebody that is doing it the way that I'd like to do it"? Or was it purely an organic experience that you began to teach in a certain way and then you iterated on that process until you refined it into, the teachings that you have today?
I I mean, it's hard. I mean, of course, I looked at guys. I really like how Coyote teaches. I really like. I was a big fan of Ryan Hall. Some of his earlier stuff that was very mechanical. So I like mechanical details. But then there's people that go way too far off onto that. Like, I mean, like not to talk poorly about anybody, but there's guys that can talk about mechanical details and why this mechanical detail works and why it's so good to know. And then, like, I've watched a couple of Mikey Musumeci's
Yeah.
instructions, and it's way. I mean, and I'm talking about I've been doing this for 23 years. It's a lot of details of things that I can't necessarily remember. I don't even remember what's going on anymore. And
Right.
so some people will do fantastic there, and that will relate to them and connect to them because they understand the body, or they know the body's names, and they understand the body parts that he's picking out. Because I think he was supposed to be a doctor, or he was going to school to be a doctor. So of
Right.
course he has these like understanding of certain bones and ligaments and things like that. But for me, that was it was a bit too much. I mean, I still watch his stuff because there's things in there I need to find, but
Right.
it just for me, I find it more of a struggle to watch and to pull out the stuff I want,
Right.
as opposed to, because I mean, like, there's so much stuff out there, right?
Yes.
There's
Right.
so
Right.
many guards, there's so many things coming out. There's so much, like, unless you are, I think, located in San Diego, you don't know. It's there's like it takes about 6 months for it to come to us. You know, it's like a wave from San Diego. There's like, oh, all of a sudden there's squid guard. Everybody's doing squid guard. Okay, now all of a sudden everybody's, you know, there's so much to learn, and you don't know what to prioritize
Right.
sometimes because
Right.
you don't
Sure.
know what's the most important thing. So yeah, it becomes difficult to know how to teach or what to teach.
Right.
Um, I've even gone backwards. So like a lot of stuff that I'm teaching on the internet
Right.
that works really well is super basics, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And
If I do a yeah,
go for it, Professor, please.
no, I say if I do a video that has to do with a lasso, man, it's gonna drop at least in 200,000 views, guaranteed. You know, so
It's crazy because I related a lot from what you were saying, because I think as the professor, not only are we gonna try to master the technique as much as we can in order to teach well and delivering the steps and the concepts and everything, but also it's our job to understand that not everyone will learn at the same time, right?
right,
So, I mean, in the same way. So sometimes like you would have related the way how you teach a little bit more to one person, and then you were teaching another one the same exact technique. It looks like you're speaking just a different language because you understand that person actually understand better that way, right? And this comes
right,
with the time and everything. But when we're looking things out there, same, like, first of all, the amount of names that has for everything now is crazy. Like sometimes I have a student ask, no, professor, do you know these guys? Like, man, show me. I don't know the name, but show me this because this thing
yeah,
exists like 50 years ago and looks like people are just great there, right?
yeah,
And that was going to be my question because I'm really fan of the foundations and the basic, because I believe understanding this game well,
mhm,
all the fancy and nice stuff, you're just gonna pick it up and gonna make much more sense because you know how things
right.
work, right? So talking about like when you were teaching for millions and millions of people that are watching your videos, how do you decide like which technique are you showing on those videos? Also, if you kind of like create a connection, hey guys, last week I taught this one about now I'm gonna teach this. And if you have like requests at the same time, sort of like three questions at once, but like people
Yeah,
just I don't know if they do like requests, they ask you to break down some movement that happened during the weekend or something like that.
yeah. So uh, I think I try to put down as much stuff as I think is not out there, right? Like if I look at their stuff and I say, hey, I haven't seen people explain jujitsu this way, this technique this way, or I haven't seen anybody highlight this detail of the technique. So like it could be like a completely basic technique, but something that, you know, when I watch other people teach it, or if I've seen somebody else teach it, I've never seen anybody highlight
Mm.
the how
Right.
you hold the wrist or how you hold this and why mechanically that makes the move better. Right. So like on one of my new instruction, like on the one of the IG instructional, so I shoot like 30 or 40 in a row. And then I just then I have a guy named Kyle Krejci. edits all my videos and puts them out there. So like just like the simple understanding of like the hand and the strength of the hand, and that like when you push the thumb in, that you lose a muscle in your forearm, and just a simple like of like how I press down when I when I do an armbar, I squeeze the thumb in and go down. It's a small mechanical detail.
Mhm.
I don't hear many people explain it or talk about it. And so I'll show the armbar and I'll show the detail of holding the thumb or pushing the thumb inside and being like, okay, well, this is a detail that makes the arm so much weaker. So the person who's trying to save their arm now has no
Right.
forearm muscle recruiting to pull back in. So I try to make sure that there's something I'm adding to jiu-jitsu that I don't normally see. And that can be hard because you start to think like, well, what the hell? So I just go through a lot. I have notebook on notebook of all my stuff that I have, right?
Yeah.
Everything that I write, I do. And then I have like little notes, like starred notes that say, oh, well, this detail, this mechanical detail. And that's usually how I know what I'm going to teach. Sometimes people will give me like, sometimes people ask for stuff I'm not great at. Like I'm not great at no gi leg entanglements. Like that's not my thing. Do I know it well enough to play there? Yes. But man, there's somebody else's site that's all they do. All they do is leg locking entanglements. And and they do it well. And as far as I know, they do it much better than me because they know much more about the position. So
Mhm.
they're being more methodical about that stuff. So I'm like, well, my stuff is a little bit different. I teach enough things. So I teach kids jiu-jitsu, right? And that's you teach kids in a completely different way that you teach adults.
Right.
Uh,
I teach adult jiu-jitsu and I teach MMA jiu-jitsu. And in MMA jiu-jitsu, if you're doing leg entanglements, you're doing the wrong jiu-jitsu. MMA's top game position, not getting submitted or getting back up or sweeping to get on top so you can punch. And so I I generally that's how I know what I'm gonna put out. Once in a blue moon, somebody will ask me. And then also what's popular, all right? Like what's popular taglines. And believe it or not, that can make or break your video. Like the tagline you say like, "Hey, like learn this armbar and break your friend's wrist at the same time." And everybody's like, "All right, you shouldn't be breaking your friend's wrists. You're not a good training partner." But believe it or not, that just helps spread
Yeah.
the 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 algorithm out, and all of a sudden everybody's visiting your videos because
Yeah. Right.
80 people don't know how to do the joke.
Well, yeah,
Right.
and I want to talk a little bit about that in a second, although I want to revisit one or two ideas. And as it relates to the infinite number of names that apply to principles in jujitsu, right? The principles are fewer than there are all these names that attend the
Right.
techniques. So in a previous episode, we talked to Professor Jason Hawkins, and Professor Hawkins got his purple belt from Hoist Gracie. So it goes without saying, about Hoist as, preeminent nature as a jujitsu practitioner and teacher. So he gives Professor Hawkins his purple belt. And on the episode, he says, Professor Hoist says, "All right, now you know everything I know." And how I interpreted that is that I linked it back to something Professor Lucas said to me early on into the class early on in my experience, which is that the highest levels of jujitsu have much more to do with execution than it does with having, 1,000 different things to do in that. And that if you
Right.
have, a small number of things in which you do well, that's actually, more apparent at the highest levels than encyclopedic knowledge of doing all these different things well. And in my mind, that's probably puts you in a difficult situation in terms of choice of video because it can feel like it would imagine to me in a situation like you have such a large audience that the repetition of understanding the principle rather than having to take the squid guard popularity of the moment, that would be some tension because to do effective teaching is to continually come back to like what are the underlying principles of these things rather
Right.
than the spectacularness. I mean, is that a fair kind of
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's like where you say like with the purple belt. Now you know everything that I know. Uh, at a certain point, jiu-jitsu becomes like reading Braille. And I say this without knowing how to read Braille. So there's a feeling that you get for
Yeah.
positions. And you may never have seen that position before, but your
Right.
body is guided by the principles and concepts that it usually functions under. So you
Mhm.
can kind of get put into a bunch of different stuff, like a new guard or different things, but and you can pass that, or you cannot get submitted, or at least you understand what's happening because you've been in so many different things. You understand what's
Yeah.
happening to your
Yes.
body.
Right.
So, I mean, that's happened a million times is that I've been put in something that is different. Maybe I haven't seen that exact version of it, but I understand what's happening with my body and it's it's not jujitsu anymore. It's just my understanding of body mechanics and the
Yes. Right.
movements that jujitsu's taught me to work through.
Right.
So yeah, it's become something like that. And I think a lot of times my techniques that I put out become something like that, where it's like, I'm just going to look at this position and I'm going to see how many different variations I can make.
Right. Right.
And
Right. Right.
then I
Right.
then I start breaking them down. What are the actual variations that are worth it? You
Right.
know, and looking at jujitsu like that and the techniques that you're teaching. Um, I mean, and I can't teach classes like that. I can't teach like every time teach a new like little variation of something, but just understanding the body helps me go, okay, well, this and I'll rep it. It could be just like an omoplata, and I understand the body a little bit more than I've understood the body before,
Right.
and I understand what I have here and why it's a control position and why this position controls better than this position, but why this position is more effective for submission than this position is for just not being countered and ending up on your back and guard.
And for
Um,
me, that's an expression of like Hicks and Gracie talking about educated instincts in that, being able to feel weight distribution, where pressure is coming from, how people are moving is, on one level, it is moving your thought process to the executive function of your brain where you're making choices and
right,
you have enough knowledge. And on a at the same time, back in your lizard brain, is a reactive piece in that been in this, you were punished previously by, you know, not understanding what was happening to you. So you react without thinking. And it's that kind of tension between, having enough experience where your body knows what to do and having enough understanding that you can think of about what to do next. And I find that a fascinating part of the experience that both things seem to be present at the same time.
yeah,
And
I think so. I use this kind of analogy a bunch. Is that at white belt the windows close slower, right? But if you're a white belt, it's still too fast for you, right?
Mhm.
Because you're thinking too much.
Mhm.
And then when you're going, so once you're a purple belt going against white belts, that window closes slower and slower. So you have more time to pick up what the necessary thing is put there and
Yeah,
what to do immediately to submit or take or counter or take a position. But then when you go against somebody who's very good and you're very good, so a black belt versus a black belt, your both of your windows are like dropping fast.
right.
And you're and then if the first person that's tried that gets caught trying to think too much is the person that becomes fatigued. So if I can force the other black belt to start thinking about techniques rather than reacting and drilling and looking, he's trying to think too much. Thinking fatigues you more than anything else. And that's why like you could be within 1 minute with another black belt. Like you could go hard as hell with a purple belt and just it'll like all be all over the place. And you're tired. You've had a good work. You're actually doing more athletic work than you were doing with the other black belt. But now when you're with the black belt, you're barely moving positions and like this, but and like your brain is thinking so fast and you're trying to think yourself through the position that you fatigue yourself. And
Yeah, right.
that's when you start really closing fast when you're fatigued and you're
Yeah.
thinking. So yeah, it has to become more reactive than it does become thought
I mean,
thought out
yeah.
process.
And I think what happens, like what that happens in the body is related to the breath, and that as you're thinking, your autonomic system, I think, tightens, and I think that reduces your ability to breathe.
Yeah.
I want to go back just for a second because I want to ask Professor Lucas, when you talked about Professor Malachi in the beginning, sort of a poor experience with people needing to assert their knowledge and kind of that and I presume we're talking about 20 years ago primarily, in terms of when the worst of that was. So Professor Lucas, as someone whose experience with jujitsu goes back a long way as well, I'm curious if that was a part of your early days and if you observed that changing over time as well, because we've talked a little bit about your early days at jiu-jitsu and what it was like to go train in Brazil with what the ethic was there. And Robert Drysdale talks about, like, as Elvis popularized karate and Joe Rogan has sort of brought jujitsu into the consciousness, some people are critical of it not having this harsher demeanor, which I think is an inaccurate assessment. So I'm just wondering, Professor Lucas, if maybe you have a corollary to that, and you were a kid, you're a
Yeah.
teenager, so the differential between training with adults, 13-year-old and a 22-year-old, that's just there's a big difference there naturally in addition to knowledge.
Mhm.
So could you kind of talk about that a
Yes,
little bit?
100%. I think, yeah, I relate a lot with Professor Malachy was saying at the beginning because now we have to say that jiu-jitsu for everyone, right? So we try to accommodate people into the jiu-jitsu community. And now I think all the professors and coaches and the community in general, they're way more educated in a way that, man, we need to provide a good experience. And all the toughness, it comes with time, right? But not everyone there is looking for be the toughest guy in the room, right? The needs are different. Like people recognize this nowadays. I believe in the best, the jiu-jitsu was for a few. And mostly of the people that stay on jiu-jitsu, like starting those that pretty much start like about our time, like 20 years ago and before that, I don't know, I'm gonna just say a number here, okay? Every 100 people that try a jiu-jitsu class, maybe 10 or 5 stick with, because it wasn't about making you a good experience. It was more about make the worst experience as possible for the new student to show how good and how tough the former students are, and just ensure you have the qualities and the grind to stay and stick with us. Like again, in my first class, I was 12 to 13 years old, and it was a gi class. However, I didn't have a gi, and the school also didn't provide a gi for me. So I did a class with jeans. That's what I had at that time, jeans and shirt, and rolling around and be tossing around by most of the people. But like for whatever reason, I decided to keep training. And once my coaches, training partners, professors recognized that I was coming back over and over, I became part of the family, right? And then everything changed. Like now they're helping, they're and everything, but just was seen like in a different manner for sure. But you see, like the most old school guys now talking about this, and everyone recognized that was like it doesn't exist anymore the way how it should, right? We know
Right.
how good jujitsu is for someone's life. And at the time was more about like competition and toughness and everything. But we know like how much confidence it brings, self-esteem and in respect and being able to protect yourself, right? So have all those other good things about it that everyone understand and everyone wants the other person to have and take the same qualities on their journey as well. So I think now is way better for the whole community. I believe still have some space for like, something go a little more rough. And then for those who have those competition classes, those, that exclusive group that want to be part of. But generally speaking, I think nowadays things are way better for, especially for the new students, like the instructions is better, the communication is better. Usually the environment is something like that. Everyone's, ready for it.
So we had Professor Malachi, we had a Professor Reggie Almeida on the podcast a number of episodes ago, and he learned jiu-jitsu in Brazil, comes up and is hired as a professor, and he talked about his beginning days of that, and he has his class, and he shreds his class. He had, like, 40 people in the class, and
Right.
he made it miserable for them, and on day
Yeah.
2, he went from 40 to 20, and by Friday, he had, like, 3 students left, and the owner of the school that hired him, like, "Hey, it can't be like this. Like,
Yeah.
this doesn't make sense." And so the criticalness of that, "Oh, the art is getting watered down," in my mind is a false notion, because I believe that it's an art that takes time to develop, and unless you have a way to kinda keep somebody with you, I've used the expression that jujitsu as a language. Like, when someone's learned the ABCs, you can't expect them to be, giving you Shakespeare, and that for someone like me, that's taken a super long time to just get the alphabet down. As doing the instruction that you do online, when I look at the number of people that are watching you, it's mind-boggling, and we were talking a little bit beforehand. If we were to consider you a media outlet 30, 40, 50 years ago, you might be like among the top, you would be among the top things being watched in the country, maybe in the world, which to me carries some interesting possibilities, which would be people might feel like they know you because they've been watching you. And
Right.
when you get to the millions, the number of people that might have that notion could be it could be like meaningful. And that,
Right.
as we listen to like celebrities, sometimes creates uncomfortable interactions. So I'm just curious if you have any stories of like people that were fans, but maybe there's good stories about that. I'm sure there is people being very, very grateful, but there might be some uncomfortable moments that came out of it too. Could you talk about that experience at all?
Yeah. I'm not so uncomfortable. Like, so I'm not that uncomfortable with meeting people or people recognizing me. I mean, I know it seems like I have a lot of followers, but it's not like I'm walking around every jiu-jitsu tournament and everybody knows who I am.
Right. Okay.
The one crazy thing is that sometimes more people will know who I am than they know who, like, let's say, like, Hoffa Mendez is there, right? And, like, Hoffa Mendez is there, and then I'm, like, right next to Hoffa Mendez, and somebody's taking a picture with me, and they're, like, walk right past Hoffa. So, there's moments like that. Mainly, I would say I'm generally not uncomfortable, but I do notice that sometimes people are staring at me, and I have a feeling that that's what it is.
Right.
They're trying to figure out if that's me, and they're like, they're looking, and they're looking, and they're looking at me, and they're like, I think that's the guy. And some people just come up to me, and they're like, oh, can we take a picture? And everything's been so far pretty wholesome.
Okay. Good.
Um,
Good.
yeah, like I haven't had anything where anybody's challenged me or anybody's wanted to fight me.
Even the
No,
bouncers.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
not that
No,
well, you don't know yet.
no,
Now we gotta go through the bounce yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about that for a second, just so that way we don't make
Well,
that an inside
I
joke.
was yeah, I was joking about, like, so I was showing, like, I'm like, "Oh, well, uh, beginners want so a lot of them wanna know they don't take jujitsu, they just wanna know how to get out of stuff, right? So, like, they're not gonna go to a jujitsu class, they're like, "How do I get out of a choke?" Like, "How do I get out of a guillotine?" So
Right.
I'm, like, showing, like, basic self-defense.
Mhm.
And I go, okay, like here's this bouncer that's about to kick your ass. Here's what you got to do. And every bouncer in the world that takes their job too seriously is on that comment list, and they
Sure.
are just pissed. Oh,
Sure.
I had one guy say that he was like, "How would you like it if showed people how to hurt BJJ instructors?" I said, "I think that's a fantastic idea. I hate most BJJ instructors." I was like, I was like, I think that would do fantastic numbers for you and your bouncer group. Like how to deal with a drunk jujitsu guy. Like how to balance with a drunk jujitsu guy. But it is what it is. There's so many crazy people out there on the internet. There's so many people that are just wild. Like their brains must just be constant radio static because I've
Right.
had people be like, that's it's like very good, but what if you would have sliced him on the Achilles? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? I'm showing a this isn't even a fight move I'm showing. I am showing Deli Hiva guard pass. Why are you associating this with like that wouldn't work if I sliced your Achilles and then hit you apart with a butterfly knife? I'm like, God, I don't know. Yeah, dude, I guess. This is it's like throwing a
Internet,
Yeah,
man,
grenade at somebody playing pickleball.
it gives the power and opportunity for people to talk without like any consequence, right? So like you
Yeah.
see some madness out there.
Yeah. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. Mike Tyson has a bit about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
the lack of threat of being punched in the face has allowed people to say whatever the heck they
Yeah.
want, wherever they want. And I think, one of the things that I admire about what you've done is that to put yourself in that line of fire, because there's such unreasonableness when you achieve the number of people that you're connecting with. It's just too many people for there not to be some percentage of people out there that are unhinged. And
Yeah.
then to continue to do it, to ignore kind of, separate all of the things that people are saying that perhaps deserve some attention in terms of a response or whatever might be the case, but and then to not take the nuttiness um, to heart where it would stop you from doing this good work in the world. As we head towards kind of the end of the hour, we love to hear stories about the impact of jujitsu, the impact doesn't have to be 100% positive. And so we ask you, tell some stories about maybe your favorite story or stories about how jujitsu impacted other folks, and we're open to whatever those stories might be.
I mean, there's been a lot of success stories, as far as children go, as far as seeing kids that uh are not, they're not rough kids. Like I've seen some kids are born rough. They like to wrestle, they like to like grab each other and throw each other to the ground, and that's just how they play. But then you get some 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 kids that aren't like that. And just to watch a kid, I remember going like having this kid who's a little bit, I think he's a more of a tennis. I think he plays tennis now, but he was a little bit timid throughout all of class. And then I had another kid come in, and this kid, you could tell, brand new, you could tell he was just an athlete, right? Like he was like even 8 or 9 years old, and you can tell these kids are athletes, right? And we had them come in, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to you see them wrestling? Do you want to do this?" He's like, "Yeah." And so like he immediately like picked up the timid kid and like slammed him to the ground
Oh
and
my
like
goodness.
tried to get on top of him. And I was like, "Hey, calm down. Just do jujitsu." And he scissor swept him, got on mount, held the kid down for, I mean, didn't submit him or anything, but held the kid down for about a good minute and a half until the round ended, at least controlling him. And I think that was like his parents seeing that, him seeing that was completely different, because I think if I wasn't on the schoolyard, like if this happened to him in the schoolyard, possibly he wouldn't have won the fight because he would have been in too much shock. But me being able to be like, hey, like I was just watching him, I'm like, calm down. Remember, just do jiu-jitsu, nothing else. And
Right.
he just, it's like, and that little bit of like a drop of mind is like, hey, stop thinking about fighting here and start thinking about what's available and what you should do to get on top, enabled him to beat somebody who was obviously 10 times as athletic as he is,
Okay.
you know, physically. And then you see a lot of, so like jujitsu changes people to a degree. I think everybody goes, oh, it's made me so humble. But then they become a brown or black belt and they're not as humble as they were before. You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost jujitsu puts them like intensifies whoever you are in those circumstances. So if you're gonna be a little bitch if there's a whole bunch of dudes around that are better than you or could beat you up, then you're gonna be a little bitch. And you're gonna be like, oh, but I'm humble now. I'm humble. And it's like, rather than saying, like, no, I'm only tough when I'm the toughest guy in the room, right? Like I've seen that, and this is especially for MMA, like too. Like like you see who's the toughest, like these tough guys that act tough, and then all of a sudden there's a tougher guy in the room, and then everybody like starts tucking tail. You know, it's jujitsu will intensify who you are before you were a white belt, I think, and that's what you have to be careful of. Is that it? Like I was always aggressive, and I've always been a somewhat aggressive person, push back and not let things happen or this or that. And so it has intensified that a little bit to me. And I have to be really careful with that because that's a time bomb. Like that's a what I have now weaponized whatever aggressiveness I could have previously. So it's also made me make a couple steps backwards, rather than getting involved in something right away, I get involved in something way later unless it doesn't need to be done. I I think jujitsu is it's important, but I think it's and also like so thinking about being a coach, right? So like thinking about what it's done for me in my life. So number one, it's given me a livelihood. It's paid for my home. It's paid for my family. You know, everything that I have is comes from jujitsu academies and jujitsu itself. And I am grateful that I became good enough at something to get to the level I am that I can do it. But it also kills jujitsu for me a little bit too. Like it breaks my
Yeah.
heart a little bit too because I put a lot of my heart into people I teach. And when people
Yes.
leave, people quit, or when people just blow up a circumstance for no reason, like it's crazy. You could have the best relationship with somebody, and all of a sudden it could blow up because they no longer want to do the class anymore, or something happens where they feel different. It's like you lose students, you lose kids sometimes that you really, really, really liked. You lose, and it's really hard to deal with it when you are approaching jujitsu, not just as a coach, but as somebody who really, really enjoys the people that you're around.
Right.
Like I don't enjoy everybody, but there's some kids that are just special. There's some adults that are just special. And relationships get blown up. Things happen all the time through this kind of stuff. You see other people training under new schools that you would never expected them not to be underneath you anymore. And then at the same time, here you are pouring yourself into your craft, into your everything you do, and you don't get to spend as much time with your wife as you should because you're working these hours, and then I'm gone Saturday and Sunday for this competition, and I'm gone for this, and I have to go film this, and so you're trying to have a relationship with your family at the same time that you're trying to stay relevant in jujitsu and have your clients, your parents and everybody happy with you that you're going to their classes, and then out of all of that, you get so talking about the watering down of jujitsu, after all that, all these things that you're doing and all the things that you're taking in, then there's guys that are getting their black belts at 7.5 years against a guy that you're not really like this. Like every black belt I've come across with this guy has been a problem and empty. Like, they open up gym after gym after gym. And now you're having to compete with not only like good jujitsu gyms, but gyms that
Yeah.
can
Right.
pretend that they're just like you. Right. And I don't know, man, jujitsu is hard. It's not an easy business to be a part of when you start to make it your business.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always have in the back of my mind when I talk to, you know, professors where their livelihood is tied to this is how it would be impossible for it not to change your relationship to jujitsu because anything that now is a job in which you're required, no matter how you feel, to be teaching, to be, and then to find space where you can have your own relationship to jujitsu, where you can go be
Right.
the student and not the teacher, because you need that to stay a good teacher. But you also, I
Right.
imagine, like this is something you love. So you need to find which, and all entrepreneurs and all successful entrepreneurs and all kinds of disciplines have the same experience of like time is difficult for the successful person. It's just,
Right.
I don't know many successful people who tell me I have all the time in the world to do whatever I want personally. That's not connected. So that dynamic, I think, exists in other places. But that personal dynamic of when you're teaching, it's not just a transaction, but you're developing a relationship. When you talk about having your
Right.
heart broken, makes sense to me because in my mind, the largest part of what gets taught isn't the technique, is that it's the other things that are present in the experience, which includes, as you say, the timid get, a little more sturdy, and maybe the overly aggressive come down a little bit. And Professor Lucas is the one that kind of taught me that notion of,
Right.
jujitsu being a moderating factor for the people who need to be moderated, and giving people, as you talked about with that child, and the children's classes, or the young people's classes are the places in which the work you're doing will blossom in ways you'll never
Right.
see, because coaches, particularly coaches of kids, I carry coaches in my memory all along my athletic life. I
Right.
took amazing things from them. So you get to see, many ways you won't get to see the blooms of this work
Right.
there. So I appreciate what you're saying. Professor, I mean, as you have grown, I mean, you have had a similar experience as a professional. I mean, we've talked a little bit about that in other circumstances. I
Mhm.
mean, it seems like you have some of the same experiences.
Oh yeah, everyone gonna have, right? Like everyone that is on involved in jiu-jitsu, it will feel that way. It's a blast and it's awesome to work with someone that you love, but at the same time, you should be really careful because you are doing jiu-jitsu, like you are teaching, you are giving like yourself, and it pays you, right? That's that's how you make a living. But at the same time, sometimes like, okay, I want to train now. That's my hobby at the same time. I love doing that all the time. But man, you love doing that all the time, but some days you need to do this all the time as well. So it's hard to find that balance. So like, okay, when I'm gonna step back a little bit or doing this or doing that, maybe I won't train as much as I want today because everyone is there, all these students, right? They wanna be with you, they wanna be part and they wanna absorb as much as you can give to them. And for the first years that I was doing this, man, I was like literally rolling training with every single student on every single class, right? And they're like, okay, the next 265, 280 pounds student come to me like, let's roll. Like, okay, let's roll. That's one class. The next class, another one. Okay, let's roll. And after 2 years, I just destroy. I don't do this anymore. So it took me like so it took me like some injuries and pains on my body to like, okay, guys, like I can do it today. I would do like maybe once a week or once a month with you guys, but every single class I'm gonna have like 10 of huge guys like trying to roll with me, and they want to do their best as I'm their professor, want to show their improvement somehow.
Right.
And but it takes a toll on your body, right? And the next hour, well, guess what? You're gonna be teaching for another 5 hours straight. You need to
Yeah.
be energetic and like give your 100% for those that are there. And about what Professor Malachy was talking on, sometimes you're gonna have those moments where you feel like down when someone leaves, someone that you get so attached and you gave so much. It's always really tough. It's always hard. I always try like as long as is a good communication and it's good for that person, but instead just like the neighbor grass is greener, and like just like for curiosity, someone go out there or sometimes like we need to recognize like, man, is a better path for you, go forward, I wish you the best. But it's always hard, right, when you get so much attached with someone and that person lives for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Professor Malachi, just to keep our promise of not, I think we could talk to you for an awfully long time. So we'll, as we head into there, everybody in the world may have already found you in terms of, where to learn about you. But should somebody not know where to find you, where do you prefer people learn about what you're doing? I know you have some online instruction that is
Yeah.
outside, the free stuff. Where should we look?
So of course I'm on Instagram and it's at Malachy Friedman. And then I'm not on TikTok as much just because I don't understand it that well yet, but I have videos that drop on there. So that's at Mal Jiu-Jitsu or Maljitsu. Yeah, Maljitsu.
Okay.
And then the other, I have a YouTube channel. Just Google my name if you
Okay.
can, Malachy Friedman. But also, I have madladbjj.com, and that's where I have all my classes. I edit those down, put them into categories, put them into like different stuff, and that's my subscription site. And I also put all my instructionals on there. So, past putting all my instructionals on there, if you become an annual member, you have access to, I think I have 11 platform instructionals that I now give that everybody has access to if they become an annual member. So, and I have a new instructional coming out. I'm filming it at the end of December, the Heisengard 2. So I'm excited about that.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We're grateful that you took the time out to spend the hour with us, and so thanks very much for a great conversation. And for those of you listening, go find Professor Malachy. Has lots and lots of great stuff there. Lots of stuff available for free, and then his online instruction give you a very deep understanding of his teachings as well. So, okay, thank you very
Thank you
much,
guys.
Professor.
Thank you.
Those.